Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Georgia. Thank you, Bryson. Thank you, Ethan. That was terrific and a really great way to start our session today, because we've got a couple of biomechanics research presentations coming up, including our first research presenter, Glenn Fleisig. And I do want to mention, as Glenn gets set to go here, that all of our panelists, as well as Glenn, are members of the American Baseball Biomechanics Society, who is a really great partner of SABR's, and appreciative of everything that you guys do with our organization. So our first research presentation today is from Glenn Fleisig, who is joining us to talk about emerging technologies in biomechanics and how they are changing baseball. Glenn?
Thanks, Scott. And that was a good lead into what I'm going to present. So let me try to share my screen now. Let's see if I could do this right here. It's my little cursor thing here. Second, and I'm almost there. Okay. You see my, Scott, you see my thing, right?
Yeah, that looks good.
All right. Let's talk about, I'm going to talk about how emerging technologies in biomechanics are changing baseball. As Scott said, I'm the president of the American Baseball Biomechanics Society, but my day job is the research director at the American Sports Medicine Institute. And again, I'm going to talk about technology. And here's a recent issue of Popular Science Monthly. It was actually October 1921. This is an up-and-coming slugger named Babe Ruth. And I think this is a funny thing. I don't know what this contraption is or what they're measuring in science, trying to solve his home run things, but his home run biomechanics. But even 100 years ago, the question came up about the science of biomechanics in baseball. And moving forward 100 years forward, this was just from a few days ago at our conference right here, Eno Saris and the panel were talking about current technology in baseball. And they talked about a lot of things like measuring the ball on the bat. And then they led into very nicely that biomechanics is the next emerging technology. Keenan Lon actually said biomechanics is the next holy crap in baseball. And then a few minutes ago, we just had the biomechanics conference panel with Megan Stewart and the other biomechanists talking about what is biomechanics. And some of the questions that came up lead very well into my presentation now, which is really about the emerging technologies in biomechanics, the accuracy and how it's used. I do want to say a couple of disclosures. I'm also a paid advisor for Major League Baseball, and I'm a paid advisor for Dari Motion, which is one of the companies I'm going to be talking about. So that's my disclosure. As the panel was just talking about, biomechanics has been tested at American Sports Medicine Institute and other places for years. In fact, I opened up ASMI with Dr. Andrews in 1987, which basically means that I'm an old guy. And here we see a current picture of our biomechanics lab. A few days ago on Thursday night, Ryan Croton showed a little video of how we test the baseball players in our lab. And again, we test the baseball players in our lab. We've been doing it for years to analyze the individuals and tell them what flaws they have to work on. But also, I'm not a team, we're a research center. So a lot of what we do is research studies focused on injury prevention and also improved treatment for injuries and also performance. So a lot of our research is also focused with outcomes that are useful for coaches or for other people. In fact, here's a little graph from PubMed, which is the publication database, about how many publications are printed throughout the world every year on the topic of baseball biomechanics. And we started ASMI, like I said, in 1987. So for about 20 years or so, the number of publications on baseball biomechanics went up every year. So a lot of these were our institute, but 5 or 10 publications. And eventually it was about 30 or 40 publications per year on baseball biomechanics. But look what's happened in the last 20 years. There are now about 160 or 180 publications each year on biomechanics studies in baseball specifically. So there's a as Georgia was just talking about, there's a boom of knowledge being published every year scientifically on baseball biomechanics. And as Scott was just mentioning, because of this, we created the American Baseball Biomechanics Society. We created this 2 years ago. And the mission of ABBS is to provide valid, valuable biomechanical information to baseball players, to coaches, to teams, and to organizations. And all four of the panelists you just saw are board members of the ABBS. So we're really trying to create a body of knowledge among scientists like you and analysts like yourselves, and among baseball teams, and to set the standards for baseball biomechanics. As Scott was also mentioning, there's a partnership, I don't know if that's the right word, but between ABBS and SABR. SABR, of course, has been around for 50 years. ABBS is the new kid on the block, but Scott reached out to me maybe 2 years ago, and I've really enjoyed the relationship we have of exchange of knowledge and helping each other. I want to point out about the ABBS, we have corporate sponsors. Again, the point is a lot of these companies are the companies mentioned in the last panel, and some companies I'll be talking about that essentially the manufacturers, the technology companies that are creating the explosion of technology advancement in baseball. You could recognize some of these names. ABBS also has 250 members, and a quick end of my commercial here is that I'm encouraging you who are watching this to join ABBS. I think you can afford the membership, the current membership fee, which is $0, and then you could become involved in ABBS. We have a lot of presentations like this one. We also hold some journal club meetings where we go over some of the most recent publications, etc. Here's the website, baseballbiomechanics.org, if you want to look into that. One of the things we did with ABBS is just a few months ago, we did a survey of all the Major League Baseball teams, and more than half the teams answered the survey to see how much is biomechanics being used in baseball right now, in professional baseball. Some of the questions that were just asked and discussed in that panel. And so of those who answered the survey, the professional baseball teams, we said, do you have outside consultants that you use? And also, do you send some of your players for evaluations at other places like ASMI or other independent institutes? And about half of the teams use some external biomechanics places or consultants. Then we also asked, on staff for your team, do you currently employ any biomechanists? And more than half the teams have at least one biomechanist on staff, 1, 2, or 3 biomechanists on staff. So a minority of teams currently do not hire biomechanists. And of course, that will be changing over time. And this is very encouraging that more than half the teams have biomechanists on staff. We then asked in the survey, does your organization own or lease these types of technologies? And that's what I'm going to be talking about this afternoon. Wearable sensors, things you put on your body, multi-camera markerless tracking, which the panel above before me just spoke about. I'm going to speak about that. You can see the majority of teams are now using multi-camera markerless technology and certainly wearable technologies. Some of the teams have marker motion capture systems, which like the picture I just showed of ASMI with the little dots on your body. And about half the teams use that single camera markerless app where you have a cell phone and you track someone's biomechanics. And so I'm not really going to talk too much about these last two right now. Again, these are the single camera ones, and the accuracy and reliability of that is for another day. I'm going to focus a little about how good are these things, because the teams are buying this, colleges are buying this, other individuals are buying some of these technologies, and then the companies, they're really flashy and it all looks very good, but how accurate is this stuff, you know? So there was a study looking at the MODIS, or what's actually now called the driveline pulse sensor. This is what's called an inertial measurement unit, which is a little sensor. You put it in the sleeve and you put it on an elbow. Many of you might be familiar with this. It's very portable, And an IMU is measuring the acceleration and the angular velocity of your elbow. It has gyroscopes and accelerometers. And there was a study done recently and published at the Mayo Clinic. Are wearable sensors, this type, valid and reliable for studying the baseball pitching motion? Again, this is a very popular item being sold to high school through professionals. And what they did was they put what was called the motor sleeve at the time on the baseball pitcher, and at the same time they did reflective markers up and down their body. They had 10 high school pitchers come into their lab, and they collected data simultaneously on both until the kid threw 5 fastballs into the strike zone. And then they analyzed the data. And just to summarize, arm stress, which is elbow torque, was about 20 to 40% less with the sleeve than it is with motion capture. But more importantly, there was a huge variability. Each dot is the average data for one pitcher. So one pitcher, the sleeve was 30% higher, but one pitcher it was 50% lower. So there's a huge variation from pitcher to pitcher to how this sensor translates to motion capture data. So they computed that the angles and the stresses vary a lot from pitcher to pitcher, and typically lower with the Modus sleeve. So the best use for this, and I guess Bryson was just talking about it in the panel, the best use for this type of technology is for measuring changes within a pitcher. How is my stress today in my elbow compared to my mechanics from 6 months ago or a month ago? Or what's the stress in my elbow in my fastball versus my curveball? Or what's the total amount of stress in my long toss versus pitching or this week? So it's very good for monitoring changes and progression within individuals, but not as good for comparing one person to another. Now, as I said, for years, we've used this marker technology, the gold standard, let's say, for capturing a baseball pitcher. You put them in their underwear in the lab or wherever, or even outdoors, and you put little dots on them, reflective markers, and then they pitch. But nowadays, there's new technologies where you could get rid of the markers, they could have their clothing, and then without the markers, this markerless motion capture can track the different body parts. So at ASMI, so this markerless technology is more convenient. Baseball teams with or without Biomechanics, well, probably with Biomechanics, can use it more conveniently. And then you could track a baseball pitcher's progression or mechanics in the lab, and also give feedback to the physical therapist and work with the pitching coaches to identify flaws and monitor the progress. The other beautiful advantage of the markerless motion capture is it's opening the world that we can now capture data, actual mechanics during games, and we can identify the flaws of the athletes, of the baseball players in competition. We could see changes during game. As Ethan was saying, there's a major league restrictions about how instant you could get the feedback. Is really more for seeing how people progress over the course of a season or things like that. But you can see how people change during the game when they get fatigued. And the other thing is, if you have the system set up, not only are you capturing your players, you're also capturing the biomechanics of your opposing team. So the big question out there in biomechanics and in baseball analytics right now is, this is exciting, but how accurate or reliable are these markerless motion capture systems? Unfortunately, over here in my lab, I have back here, I have the marker system and the markerless system. And you can see these are the cameras for the marker system. And they watch the reflective markers on the baseball pitcher, and they track it here. And simultaneously, we have these markerless cameras here. This is from a Dari system, and these were from Motion Analysis Corporation, but marker versus markerless. And the markerless system just tracks and creates the stick figure of the person during the pitch. And we could do these simultaneously. So what we do is we have 60 feet 6 inches in our indoor lab in Birmingham. We had each pitcher get the markers on, warm up, and then we had them throw 10 fastballs from the mound to home plate. We had 30 pitchers in this study threw about 10 pitches each. We had to throw out a few trials, but it was 275 fastballs. And I want to point out that this study, we use a full variety of baseball players from youth through professional. So we're testing the systems compared for little guys from 4'8" to 6'5" and throwing from 50 miles per hour to 90 miles per hour to see the strength of the systems comparison across a range of players. What we did was we looked at various times, maximum knee height, front foot contact, maximum external rotation, and the time of ball release. We looked at various measurements at these different times. Some of these types of variables Ryan Crutton was talking about on Thursday. But anyway, the two systems measured at these different times, 18 different kinematics or kinematic parameters. And we also measured time series of how elbow flexion and shoulder abduction changed over time. And I'm not going to get into heavily in the details, but I just handpicked a few of these results. We're publishing the full study right now. But what you can see is this was the marker system, the conventional system. Maximum external rotation, how far back you could crank back your arm, average about 180 degrees per pitcher. The standard deviation from pitcher to pitcher was about 11 degrees, but the standard deviation within pitcher was only 2 degrees. And you can see that's for other things like knee flexion, that there's a standard deviation from pitcher to pitcher of about 10 degrees. And then within a person, only 2 degrees. This shows this is a good system, this marker system, because sure enough, people vary from one pitcher to another. But the fact that the standard deviation within person was so tight, maybe when I pitch, I do vary by 2 degrees from my first fastball to my second fastball. But the fact that the systems are so consistent from pitch to pitch shows that this system seems to be working within a pitcher. Now, here is the same data for the markerless system. And I'm very pleased to say that the standard deviation, again, varied from pitcher to pitcher, but the system was pretty tight within person. Now, it's also interesting, the marker system said the maximum external rotation on average was 180, and the markerless said 170, and likewise, elbow was 107 or 94. So there were differences in what the average value was per system. And that's okay. If the two systems are measuring a different magnitude, that's okay, as long as they kind of match each other. And looking within each system seems consistent within each itself. How about comparing the systems? Well, here's a visual of elbow flexion, how much you're bending your elbow, where 0 is a straight arm and 190 is a L-shaped elbow. And any pitcher, this is pitcher 1, you can see over time as he pitches, he reduces elbow flexion or straightens his elbow. The red squiggles are trial after trial for that pitcher with the marker system, and the blue squiggles are trial after trial with the markerless. And just visually, you could see that pretty tight. Every markerless pitch looked the same, every marker pitch looked the same, but there was some differences between the two systems. And same with shoulder rotation, you can see pretty tight within system, but there's a little differences between the two systems. Same with trunk rotation. So what we found was that the time series were consistent within each system, and also pretty consistent between the two systems. Statistics we did was called coefficient of multiple correlations, CMC, and showed a very high correlation. There were significant differences in what the value was, the angle was between the systems, typically 0 to 15 degrees. I want to point out that there were previous studies, not in baseball, that looked at marker and markerless, and they showed bigger differences between their technologies. So I think things have improved over time, or basically the systems being used in baseball are pretty good. So why are there differences between marker and markerless data that we're using in baseball? The marker system is considered the gold standard. So our marker data that we've made at ASMI and elsewhere right, and is markerless data wrong? It's not that simple. I want to point out that the marker system, what you do is you track the baseball pitcher, you look at where the markers are, like his 2 knee markers, and you say his knee joint is the middle of those 2 markers, and his hips, you look at the little markers on the hips and you say his hip joint is here, and then you draw lines and say there, that's where his thigh is. So that's how that technology works, simply put. The markerless, it tracks the blobs. This blob is your arm, this blob is your leg, and it says that's where the thigh is, and it gets joint centers for the knee and the hip and connects it. So it's not that one is better than the other, it's that they're different. And I want to point out that even though they're different, the kinematics vary because of these differences and in the different calculations of joint centers. So that's how things are a little different. Some of the things we were talking about in that panel right before me is the markerless being used by major league teams, not in the ASMI lab, but out in the stadium. And I just want to point out, I can't really go into it very much either, but I can tell you there's a bunch of independent validation research underway. Major League Baseball as an entity is studying how accurate and reliable are the markerless systems being used in professional baseball. I'm involved in that research. Again, it's internal within Major League Baseball. And then different teams, as the panel before me have alluded to, and others have, individual teams have the different technologies, and they're doing internal validation within themselves. But I could just conclude that I'm pretty impressed. I'm pretty pleased with how the multi-camera markerless tracking systems are working these days. Looking at the time, I think I just want to make some conclusions and then open up for a few questions. We want our baseball teams to win, and to win, they need a competitive advantage. They need to have better performance, and they need safety to keep their players on the field. So this depends on the skills of the baseball players themselves, and also is influenced by sabermetrics. And sabermetrics, historically, traditionally, is the analysis of what the players do. How far did they throw or hit or run or whatever. And this has been affecting positively the decisions in personnel and strategies of teams. So again, sabermetrics to me is studying the is measuring what happens on the baseball field, and biomechanics is really measuring what the baseball player is doing to create those outcomes. And I really think this is the new revolution in baseball, the next money ball. I think it's here, and some of the technologies that I've described are now capturing data on the field. And biomechanics data, as the panel just discussed, is used by coaches and trainers, but it's also used in scouting players in professional baseball and elsewhere. Okay, I think I'm going to stop it right there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open it up for questions. So let me, I like doing this virtual thing, but it kind of stinks not being in person with you guys and gals. But here we are. So, okay. Keenan Long is here. He says, holy crap. Thanks, Keenan. At what point in the analysis does the 240 hertz frequency become a limiting factor in your ability to analyze variables or limiting factor at all? If the system is higher frame rate, how would that affect your analysis? Very good technical question, Keenan. Holy crap. So many of the systems capture data. I capture data at 240 hertz here at ASMI. The systems out there are capturing at 200 hertz or 300 hertz or even 500 hertz. We've done some studies, and biomechanical data, if you're over 120 hertz or so, it can measure the baseball pitching motion and also the batting motion. Your body doesn't change really any faster than that, and at 200 hertz or higher, you could get enough data on how your body's moving. The only place where 200, 300 hertz data isn't good enough is if you're trying to measure impacts, like the ball on the bat or people crashing into each other. But for most biomechanics, that's good enough. Well, let me see how I do this thing. Okay. Is there any inherent advantage to the marker system compared to the markerless system? Telvaya asked. The advantage of the marker system has been the number of validity studies that have shown that it is valid. Yeah, so that's the major advantage right now, that it's a proven entity, and markerless is we're getting there. Okay. Oops. John asks, what remain the biggest areas of disagreement in the biomechanics realm, conflicting paper findings? Actually, John, a lot. And I want to point out one thing. You really can't compare the actual magnitudes, like I said, in one study using my marker system or whatever, and say that the average elbow flexion is 90 degrees compared to another system, a markerless system, because it might say 80 degrees or 100 degrees. So there's a lot of conflicting measurements of the exact measurements. But as far as findings, there are also, unfortunately, a lot of papers that conflict with each other. One paper says sagittal trunk tilt is a positively correlated to ball velocity, and another paper says sagittal trunk tilt is negatively or not affected to ball velocity. So unfortunately, there are a lot of conflicts in the studies right now. We got to work on that. Matt says, good work as always. Thanks, Matt. For the CMC you did you do the analysis on the peaks or the time series data? What is your suggestion for time series data validity, reliability? Yes. So Matt, for comparing the marker versus markerless, again, the paper's coming out soon. For comparing, we use CMC for comparing the full time series. It is comparing the full time series. For comparing exact points like maximum external rotation or maximum knee flexion, things like that, we use Bland-Altman. And if you're familiar with that, Bland-Altman is a kind of a graphical way of comparing different measurements. John asks, are there any biomechanical archetypes that prove particularly difficult to get reliable metrics on, or all pitching forms approximately equal in resulting error? Well, actually, I believe in the early stages of the Modus sleeve, driveline pulse sleeve, they had trouble with submarine pitchers. There's some assumptions in the system that the arm was above horizontal, not below horizontal. So some numbers flipped. That might have been resolved. As far as motion capture, it works well. The 3D, the multi-camera systems work well for sidearm pitchers, overhand pitchers, lefties, righties, etc. The single camera systems, I'm not so sure about, but the multi-camera systems, you get the full picture, and it works equally well with everybody. Stephen asks, why did you choose to only track fastballs in your study? Do you think your results would have different at all if you tracked a variety of pitches or other pitches? I think we did that in some of the stuff we're doing with MLB. We looked at fastballs and curveballs. We've also compared fastballs and curveballs in other studies, such as when we looked at mound height and pitching distance. Stephen, just to be brief, we just focused on one thing, which was fastball. And I do think we might find slightly different results if we compared curveball between systems to systems, but you got to start somewhere. And I think if we could see if fastballs to fastballs vary between systems, I think that answers the basic question, but there is value in looking at other types of pitches. Naive Stephen Derdinger asks, naive question. So many case studies seem to be around pitching motion or batting analysis as well developed and realizing as many performance benefits. I could just say you're right, Stephen, it was not naive. More of the studies are around pitching. And I could just say, I think I'm partly responsible for that, or my fault or credit or whatever. We started ASMI in 1987. Dr. Andrews hired me, and here's ASMI's lab, but over here is Dr. Andrews' surgery center. And frankly, the surgery center is filled of baseball pitchers coming in for surgery, not baseball batters. So you do biomechanics for safety and for performance, and just because ASMI has been set up as a sports medicine institute, not a sports performance institute. Historically, a lot of our research is focused on pitching, and other people have followed suit. Batting is just as important. I think it's just not as much stuff is out there. I think, Scott, I think that's my time limit here. If anyone wants to contact me with other questions, fine, but otherwise I will pass up the gavel back to you.
All right, Glenn, thank you so much for joining us. That was terrific.